I stood paralyzed in the middle of the Boston Harbor Hotel lobby, staring at my husband Michael, the same husband whose charred remains I had supposedly identified after a tragic cabin fire 18 months ago, whose life insurance had paid for the therapy our children needed to process their grief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Chopper. Expression on Michael's face was unmistakable, pure panic. It wasn't the face of someone confused by a stranger's approach, but the face of a man seeing his carefully constructed lie crumble before his eyes. The blonde woman looked between us, her brow furrowing with confusion. "What's going on, Richard?" she asked him, her British accent evident even in those few words. Richard. Not Michael. Of course he'd changed his name. I didn't scream or cause a scene. Instead, I smiled calmly and said, "I think your Richard and I need to have a chat about the $1.2 million insurance policy that paid out when he supposedly died in that fire." I turned to my husband directly. "Fancy meeting you here, Michael. The children still have nightmares about your death, by the way." His eyes widened with terror before he turned and pulled the confused woman toward the exit, whispering urgently in her ear as they retreated. I stood rooted to the marble floor, my heart thundering in my chest as I watched the ghost of my husband disappear through the revolving doors. The conference name badge hanging around my neck suddenly felt heavy. Eleanor Bennett, child psychologist. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent the past 18 months helping children process trauma and loss, while unable to help my own kids heal from the ultimate betrayal. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and opened the camera app. I might not have hard evidence yet, but I had the beginning, a single photograph of Michael, very much alive, hurrying away with his new companion. My name is Eleanor Bennett, 42 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I believed I was a widow. For over a year and a half, I've been raising our twins, Sophie and Liam, now 15, alone in our suburban Philadelphia home. I've been working double shifts at my private practice to maintain some semblance of normalcy for them, all while navigating the crushing weight of grief that descended upon our family when Michael died. The authorities had been certain about what happened. A weekend fishing trip to our cabin in the Pocono Mountains had ended in tragedy when a fire broke out in the middle of the night. The cabin had burned to the ground, leaving little more than ash and bone fragments. The dental records matched. The DNA test confirmed it. My husband was dead, except he wasn't. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Diane, my colleague from the conference. "Eleanor, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew how accurate that statement was. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just thought I recognized someone." "Well, the keynote is starting in 5 minutes. We should head back." I nodded absently, my mind racing. How could I sit through a presentation on childhood trauma when I was experiencing my own psychological earthquake? But somehow, I followed Diane back to the conference hall, taking my seat while my thoughts spun wildly out of control. The speaker's words faded into background noise as I scrolled through my photo gallery. There he was, Michael, or Richard, as he was calling himself now. His hair was different, shorter, with touches of gray he would have previously dyed away. He'd lost weight and grown a neatly trimmed beard. But those eyes, I would recognize those hazel eyes anywhere. The eyes I had gazed into on our wedding day. The eyes I had seen filled with tears when our children were born. The eyes I thought had closed forever in that fire. I zoomed in on the woman beside him. Young, at least a decade younger than me. Polished, elegant, with the confident stance of someone who had never had her world shattered. Was she the reason? Had Michael orchestrated this elaborate deception just to be with her? Or was there something more sinister behind his disappearance? The cabin fire had always raised questions in my mind. Michael rarely went fishing alone. He was always either with friends or taking the kids. That weekend had been unusual. He'd insisted on going by himself, claiming he needed space to think about a major career decision. He'd kissed me goodbye with more tenderness than usual, hugged the kids a bit longer. Had those been the actions of a man saying his final goodbye? I pulled up my banking app during a break in the presentation. The life insurance payout had saved us from financial ruin after Michael's death. His tech consulting business had been struggling, something he'd hidden from me until just before his death. The insurance money had paid off our mortgage, covered the children's therapy, and given us a cushion to rebuild our lives. Had that been the plan all along? Was I just a means to a $1.2 million payout? My hands trembled as I sent a quick text to my sister, Janet, who was staying with the kids back in Philadelphia. Something came up. Might need to stay an extra day. We'll explain later. As the conference session ended, I ducked out quickly, avoiding conversation with colleagues. Back in my hotel room, I paced, trying to sort through my shock and formulate a plan. My psychological training kicked in. I needed evidence, not just a blurry photo and my certainty. I needed to understand what had happened and why. I searched Richard and the woman's name tag I'd glimpsed, Olivia Hartley, on social media. Nothing concrete appeared, but a business profile for a Richard Wells at a Boston tech firm showed a carefully angled photo that could be Michael. The company specialized in cybersecurity, Michael's field of expertise. The firm's website listed Richard Wells as their Chief Innovation Officer, a position he'd held for over a year. Their office was located just 3 blocks from my hotel. Could it really be this easy? My phone rang. It was Sophie. For a moment, I considered not answering. How could I speak to my daughter when I'd just discovered her father had abandoned us? Not died? But I couldn't ignore her. Mom, are you coming home tomorrow? Liam's having nightmares again. My heart constricted. The twins still struggled with their father's death. Sophie had become withdrawn, throwing herself into academics, while Liam acted out, his grief manifesting as anger. Both saw therapists weekly, paid for by their father's life insurance. Yes, sweetheart, I'll be home tomorrow evening. I hesitated. How are you holding up? I'm fine, she said, using the same tone I had used with Diane earlier. Like mother, like daughter, both of us hiding our pain. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, torn between rushing home to protect my children and staying to gather evidence against the man who had so callously abandoned us. The decision crystallized. I would stay. Michael or Richard had taken enough from us. He wouldn't take justice, too. I opened my laptop and searched for private investigators in Boston, finding one with excellent reviews who specialized in insurance fraud. As I dialed the number, a strange calm settled over me. The shock was giving way to something else, a cold, focused anger that propelled me forward. Trinity Investigations, a woman answered. My name is Eleanor Bennett, I said, surprised by my steady voice. I need help gathering evidence on my husband, who faked his death 1.5 years ago. I just saw him alive in Boston with another woman. There was a momentary pause before the woman replied, Ms. Bennett, my name is Vivian Reed. I believe we need to talk. Our office is in the Back Bay area, Vivian Reed said over the phone. Can you meet in an hour? Her tone was professional, but I detected a note of genuine concern. Perhaps she'd handled cases like mine before, though I doubted anyone's story could match the surreal nightmare I was experiencing. I'll be there, I confirmed, writing down the address. I freshened up quickly, studying my reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked surprisingly composed for someone whose reality had just imploded. My chestnut hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, a few strands of gray I hadn't bothered to color framing my face. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, lines etched by tears and sleepless nights. In the back of my mind, A voice whispered an uncomfortable question. Had Michael left because I was aging? Because the stress of raising teenagers and maintaining a career had stolen my youth? I pushed the thought away. Self-doubt was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I changed from my conference attire into something less conspicuous. Dark jeans, a navy sweater, and a leather jacket. If Michael was still in the vicinity, I didn't want to be easily spotted. As I gathered my purse and room key, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Missed you at the afternoon session. Everything okay? Typed a quick response about a migraine, promising to catch up tomorrow. Another lie in a growing collection. Trinity Investigations occupied the third floor of a discreet brownstone on a quiet street lined with maple trees just beginning to turn gold with autumn. A small brass plaque beside the door was the only indication of the business inside. I rang the bell, and moments later, the door was opened by a tall woman with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "Eleanor Bennett?" she asked, extending her hand. "Vivian Reed, please come in." The office was warm and surprisingly comfortable, more like a home study than the sterile detective agency I'd imagined. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk topped with multiple computer monitors dominated one corner. Vivian gestured for me to sit in a leather armchair while she took the one opposite. "Before we begin," she said, placing a digital recorder on the small table between us, "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. May I record our conversation?" I nodded, and she pressed a button. "Please start from the beginning," she said. "Tell me everything about your husband's supposed death and what you witnessed today." I took a deep breath and began with the basics. My husband, Michael Bennett, was declared dead 18 months ago after a fire destroyed our cabin in the Poconos. His remains were identified through dental records and DNA testing. Today, I saw him alive in the lobby of the Boston Harbor Hotel with a woman who called him Richard. For the next 40 minutes, I detailed our life together, the circumstances of the fire, the investigation that followed, and the insurance settlement. Vivian listened intently, occasionally stopping me to clarify details. "The dental records and DNA confirmation are significant," she noted, typing something into her tablet. "Either the testing was compromised, or someone inside the system helped falsify the results. That level of deception requires resources and connections." Michael worked in cybersecurity, I explained. He had contacts in various government agencies, people who owed him favors. He was always vague about certain projects, citing confidentiality agreements. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "That could explain a lot. Do you have any recent photos of him before the disappearance?" I pulled out my phone and showed her pictures from our family vacation to Cape Cod, 3 months before the fire. Michael smiled back from the screen, his arm around me, the twins building a sandcastle in the foreground. We looked happy. Were we? Had I been blind to his unhappiness, or had his smile been as fraudulent as his death? "And this is what you captured today?" Vivian asked, examining the blurry photo I'd taken in the hotel lobby. "Yes. He's changed his appearance, but it's definitely him." She studied the image carefully. "The beard helps disguise his jawline, and the hair is different, but the eyes and brow structure match. It's enough for me to start with." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we gather evidence," Vivian replied. "All business. I'll need you to sign some paperwork authorizing my investigation. Then I'll need access to your financial records from before and after his disappearance. Insurance documents, death certificate, anything you have related to the case." As she printed forms for me to sign, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "Have you seen cases like this before?" Vivian paused, her expression softening slightly. Pseudocide, faking one's death, happens more often than people realize, though rarely with this level of sophistication. Usually it's done to escape debt, criminal charges, or family obligations. She handed me a pen. In my experience, there's almost always money involved and nearly always another relationship. The word stung, even though I'd suspected as much. The woman with him seemed genuinely surprised to see me. I don't think she knew about his past. That's common too, Vivian said. The new partners are often kept in the dark. It's easier to start fresh without explaining complicated history. Complicated history. Such a clinical way to describe abandoning your family and traumatizing your children. After signing the paperwork and agreeing to email Vivian copies of all relevant documents, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since I first saw Michael alive. What should I do if I see him again? Should I approach him? Call the police? Vivian considered this carefully. For now, maintain your distance. Document any sightings but don't engage. We need solid evidence before confronting him or involving authorities. She handed me her card. Call me immediately if you see him again, no matter what time it is. As I stood to leave, a framed newspaper article on her wall caught my attention. The headline read, Boston PI cracks $1 million insurance fraud ring. The photo showed a younger Vivian shaking hands with an insurance company executive. One of my bigger cases, she said, following my gaze. A group of doctors and lawyers staging accidents for insurance payouts. Took 3 years to build the case, but we got them all. The confidence in her voice reassured me. If anyone could help unravel Michael's deception, it was Vivian Reed. One more thing, she said as she walked me to the door. Have you told anyone else about seeing your husband? No, not yet. Keep it that way for now. The fewer people who know, the better our chances of gathering evidence before he disappears again. Back in my hotel room, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was wearing off, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I ordered room service, though I doubted I could eat. As I waited for my food, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Family, vacations, birthday celebrations, everyday moments when we were just a normal, happy family. Had it all been a lie? Or had something changed, pushing Michael to such an extreme decision? I paused on a photo from our anniversary dinner, just 2 months before the fire. Michael was raising a glass of champagne, his smile reaching his eyes, as he toasted to another 20 years. Had he already been planning his escape then? The thought made me physically ill. The room service waiter interrupted my spiraling thoughts, delivering a salad I picked at half-heartedly. After he left, I opened my laptop and logged into our old joint email account, one I still checked occasionally for lingering bills or notifications. Most of the emails were promotions or newsletters, but one caught my eye. A travel confirmation dated 3 weeks before the fire. Michael had booked a weekend in Boston, a trip he'd never mentioned to me. My heart raced as I opened the email. It was a hotel reservation for 2 nights at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, supposedly for a cybersecurity conference. I'd never questioned it. Michael attended conferences regularly. But now I wondered, had he been meeting Olivia even then? Setting the groundwork for his new life? I searched for the conference name and dates. There had indeed been a cybersecurity event that weekend, lending legitimacy to his cover story. But had he actually attended, or had it merely provided an excuse to be in Boston? I forwarded the email to Vivian, along with a brief explanation of my discovery. Then I did something I'd avoided for 18 months. I pulled up the fire investigation report. The officials had concluded that the fire started from a faulty space heater in the cabin's main room, spreading rapidly due to the dry wooden structure. Michael had supposedly been asleep when the fire broke out, likely overcome by smoke before he could escape. The report noted that the cabin's remote location delayed fire response, resulting in the structure being completely engulfed by the time firefighters arrived. Reading it now with fresh suspicion, I noticed details I'd overlooked in my grief. The space heater had been relatively new. We'd purchased it just that summer. The fire had spread with unusual speed, even for a wooden cabin. And most significantly, no one had actually seen Michael arrive at the cabin that weekend. We only had his word that he was going there. I forwarded the report to Vivian as well, highlighting these concerns. As midnight approached, I found myself standing at the hotel window, looking out at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, the man I had mourned, the man whose absence had created a void in my children's lives, was living a new existence. Did he ever think about us? Did he feel any remorse for the pain he had caused? My phone chimed with a text. Message from Vivian. Got your emails. Good finds. Have started surveillance on the tech company. Will update in the morning. Try to get some rest. Rest seemed impossible, but I knew I needed to maintain my strength. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more pain, but also, hopefully, the first steps toward answers and justice. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized in my mind. Michael Bennett had died in that fire, in a way. The man I had loved, the father of my children, no longer existed. In his place was a stranger named Richard, a man capable of unimaginable cruelty and deception, and I would make sure he answered for what he had done. The morning brought fresh determination, along with the first light filtering through my hotel curtains. I had managed a few hours of fitful sleep, my dreams populated by images of Michael walking away, always just out of reach. I woke feeling surprisingly clear-headed, the shock of yesterday giving way to a focused resolve. My phone showed a text. From Vivian sent at 6:30 a.m. Meeting at my office, 8 a.m., have information. I showered quickly, my mind cataloging what I knew and what I still needed to learn. The conference wasn't due to resume until 10 a.m., giving me time to meet with Vivian first. I sent a quick message to the organizers, explaining that I'd be late. For the morning session, professional obligations seemed trivial now, but I needed to maintain appearances. The crisp autumn air felt invigorating as I walked briskly to Trinity Investigations. Boston was coming alive around me, commuters hurrying to work, coffee shops filling with morning customers, a city fully unaware of the personal earthquake reshaping my existence. Vivian was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a tablet full of information. You look like you could use this, she said, sliding one of the cups toward me as I took a seat. Cream, no sugar, right? I nodded, surprised by her attention to detail. Did you sleep at all? This profession isn't kind to normal sleep patterns, she replied with a hint of a smile. But it was worth it. I've got preliminary information on our Richard Wells. She turned her tablet toward me, revealing a corporate profile page with Michael's photo. Or rather, Richard's. He looked polished and professional, the beard neatly trimmed, his expression confident. Chief Innovation Officer at SecureTech Solutions, a cybersecurity firm specializing in corporate and government contracts. He joined the company 14 months ago, Vivian explained. Just 2 months after the fire. According to their press release announcing his hiring, he previously worked for a tech firm in London, which explains the girlfriend's British accent. London? I repeated, confused. Michael never worked in London? Exactly. I checked with contacts in the UK tech industry. The company he supposedly worked for does exist, but they have no record of a Richard Wells or Michael Bennett. His entire resume appears to be fabricated. I stared at the screen, at the stranger, who wore my husband's face. How does someone just create a new identity like this? New name, new history, new credentials. With difficulty, usually, Vivian said, swiping to a new screen. Unless they have specialized skills and connections. Your husband's background in cybersecurity would give him the technical knowledge. As for the documentation, forged passports, driver's licenses, social security numbers, that requires either significant underground connections or help from someone inside the system. She showed me surveillance photos taken early that morning. Michael, Richard entering a sleek office building, briefcase in hand, nodding to the security guard with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. He lives in a luxury apartment, in Back Bay with Olivia Hartley, Vivian continued. She's legitimate, British citizen, works as an art curator at the Gardner Museum. They've been together approximately 1 year based on social media activity. My stomach twisted at the timeline. He'd barely waited 2 months after dying before starting a relationship with this woman. What about the insurance? I asked. There's no way they would have paid out $1.2 million without a thorough investigation. That's where it gets interesting, Vivian said, pulling up a new document. I have contacts at major insurance companies. Your husband's policy was with Eastern Life, and they did investigate, standard procedure for high-value policies. But the investigation was closed surprisingly quickly. She pointed to a signature at the bottom of the report. The chief investigator was Thomas Mercer. Does that name ring any bells? I frowned, thinking back. Yes, he was Michael's college roommate. They stayed in touch over the years, occasional reunions and holiday cards. But I had no idea he worked for Eastern Life. Convenient connection, Vivian noted. Mercer left Eastern Life 3 months after your husband's case was settled. Bought a vacation home in the Cayman Islands shortly after. I'm having someone look into his finances. The implications were clear. Michael had help from the inside. Someone willing to rush through the investigation and certify a fraudulent death. What about the medical examiner? I asked. The dental records? The DNA test? Working on that, Vivian replied. Medical fraud is harder to trace, but not impossible. Someone had to provide biological samples that would match your husband's profile. Given enough money and the right connections, records can be falsified. I took a long sip of coffee, trying to process the magnitude of the deception. So it wasn't just a spontaneous decision to run away. This was planned, possibly for months. Most likely, Vivian agreed. The level of detail suggests extensive preparation. And the fire itself? I asked, remembering the investigation report I'd sent her. I spoke with a former arson investigator this morning, she said. Based on the report, he believes the fire could have been deliberately set. The space heater was likely the reported cause because that's what was left to find, but the rapid spread suggests an accelerant might have been used. Arson. The word sent a chill through me. Not only had Michael abandoned us, but he'd intentionally destroyed our family cabin to cover his tracks. The place where we'd spent summers, where the twins had learned to fish and swim, reduced to ash, as part of his escape plan. What do we do now? I asked, setting down my cup with a determined clink. Now we gather conclusive evidence, Vivian replied. We need documentation linking Michael Bennett to Richard Wells, proof that they're the same person, proof of the fraud, and proof of any accomplices. Once we have that package, we take it to the authorities. And if we approach him directly? The thought had been circling my mind since yesterday, confronting Michael, demanding answers face to face. Not yet, Vivian cautioned. Right now, he believes your encounter was chance, a fluke that he can run from again if necessary. The moment he realizes you're actively investigating, he might disappear, and we'd be back to square one. She had a point, but the thought of going back to the conference, pretending everything was normal while Michael walked free just blocks away, felt unbearable. I understand your frustration, Vivian said, reading my expression. But patience will serve us better than confrontation at this stage. Give me 48 hours to build a solid case. I nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I want updates throughout the day. Agreed. She handed me a small device that looked like a pepper spray canister. This is a covert camera. Press the side button once to take a photo, twice for video. If you see him again, document it, but maintain distance. As I left Trinity Investigations, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Mom, when are you coming? Home? Liam got in trouble at school again. Reality crashed back upon me. While I was hunting a ghost in Boston, my children were struggling in Philadelphia. I called Sophie immediately. What happened with Liam? I asked when she answered. He punched a kid who said something about Dad, she explained, her voice tight with stress. The principal wants to meet with you tomorrow. I closed my eyes, leaning against a building as pedestrians streamed past. Is he suspended? No, but they're threatening it if it happens again. Aunt Janet's trying to handle it, but… She trailed off, the unspoken message clear. They needed their mother. I'll be home tomorrow evening, I promised. Can you put Liam… On the phone, there was a rustling sound, then my son's defensive voice. I'm not apologizing to that jerk. Liam, I said gently, what happened? He said Dad probably killed himself to get away from us, Liam spat out. Said his dad works in insurance and that's what people do when they're tired of their families. My blood ran cold. The irony was too cruel, a callous teenage comment that had accidentally hit upon the truth. That's horrible, and I understand why you were angry, I said carefully. But violence isn't the answer, buddy. Whatever, he muttered, the pain beneath his anger palpable even through the phone. I'll be home tomorrow and we'll talk about it properly, okay? I love you. Both of you. After extracting a grudging love you too from Liam, I hung up, my heart heavy. The consequences of Michael's deception continued to ripple outward, damaging our children in ways he had probably never considered. Or perhaps he had considered it and simply didn't care. I checked the time, 9:45 a.m. I needed to make an appearance at the conference, if only to maintain my cover. As I walked, I struggled to refocus my thoughts on child psychology and professional development, but my mind kept circling back to one disturbing question. What else had Michael lied about? Our entire marriage, our life together. How much of it had been real? Had he ever loved me? Loved our children? Or had we simply been props? In the performance of Michael Bennett, respectable family man, by the time I reached the conference center, I had made a decision. I would give Vivian her 48 hours to build the case properly. But after that, no matter what, I would confront the man who had shattered our lives. I needed to look him in the eyes and hear whatever justification he offered for abandoning his family and faking his own death. I owed our children that much. The conference dragged interminably. I sat through presentations on childhood trauma and resilience with a painful awareness of the irony. I was an expert on helping children process grief, yet completely unprepared for the grief I now realized had been built on lies. During breaks, I checked my phone obsessively for updates from Vivian, while fielding concerned questions from colleagues about my distracted demeanor. Just worried about a situation with my son, I explained to Diane when she caught me checking my watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Not entirely a lie. By the time the day's last session ended at 4 p.m., I had a text from Vivian. Progress made. Meet at my office at 5. I hurried out of the conference center, stopping briefly in my hotel room to change and gather my thoughts. The initial shock had evolved into a mixture of anger and determination, with occasional waves of grief for what I now understood was a marriage built partially, perhaps entirely, on deception. Vivian was on the phone when I arrived at her office, gesturing for me to take a seat while she finished her conversation. Yes, I understand the sensitivity. No, we're not ready to involve them yet. I'll call you tomorrow with an update. She hung up and turned to me. That was a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I didn't give specifics yet, but I wanted to understand the protocols for a case like this. The FBI? I hadn't considered federal involvement, though it made sense given the interstate nature of the fraud. Insurance fraud crossing state lines falls under their jurisdiction, Vivian explained, especially with the sums involved, but we're not there yet. She spread several folders on the desk between us. First, let's review what we've discovered today. The first folder contained financial records, Michael's transactions in the months before his disappearance. Your husband made several cash withdrawals, totaling approximately $50,000 in the 6 months before the fire, Vivian pointed out. Small enough amounts to avoid triggering automatic reports, but substantial in aggregate. I frowned, remembering Michael's excuses for these withdrawals. He told me it was for investment opportunities that required cash deposits. I never questioned. He always handled our investments. Classic preparation for disappearing, Vivian noted. Building a cash reserve that can't be traced electronically. She moved to the next document. He also transferred $25,000 to this account in the Caymans, supposedly for an overseas investment. I stared at the transfer record, feeling a renewed sense of betrayal. While claiming financial strain to me, he'd been systematically moving money offshore. What about our regular accounts? I asked. After his death, I discovered we had far less saved than I thought. That's where it gets interesting, Vivian replied, opening another folder. I've traced a pattern of investments and losses over the 3 years before his disappearance. On paper, it looks like he made several poor investment decisions, gradually depleting your joint savings. But you don't think that's what happened? I think it was deliberate, she said. The pattern is too convenient. Legitimate-looking investments that failed just enough to reduce your assets without raising red flags. Meanwhile, he was building his escape fund elsewhere. The systematic nature of the deception made my stomach turn. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a midlife crisis. Michael had orchestrated his exit meticulously over years. Vivian continued to the next folder. Now for his new identity. Richard Wells appears to have a complete background. British. Education, career history, tax records. But when we dig deeper, the documentation only goes back about 2 years. Before that, Richard Wells effectively didn't exist. How is that possible in this day and age? I asked. Wouldn't employers verify his background? They should, Vivian agreed. But your husband, Michael, works in cybersecurity, creating digital records, backdating files, even creating fake references who would verify his history if called, all within his expertise. She showed me documents outlining Richard Wells's supposed career path: graduation from Imperial College London, positions at British tech firms, then a move to the United States for a unique opportunity in advanced cybersecurity. None of this matches Michael's actual history, I noted, studying the fabricated resume. No, but it creates a consistent narrative for his new life, Vivian explained. And his current position at Secure Tech Solutions gives him both high compensation and low public visibility, ideal for someone hiding in plain sight. The next folder contained surveillance photos of Michael and Olivia, entering their apartment building, dining at a restaurant, walking through the public garden hand in hand. They looked like any affluent couple, comfortable and content in their shared life. What about the woman, Olivia? I asked, studying her face in the photos. She was beautiful in an understated way, with an air of sophistication that made me feel suddenly self-conscious about my practical mom haircut and sensible wardrobe. Olivia Hartley, 34, British citizen, art history PhD from Cambridge, Vivian supplied. Moved to Boston 2 years ago for her position at the Gardner Museum. No criminal record, no suspicious financial activity. By all appearances, she believes Richard Wells is exactly who he claims to be. I tried to imagine Olivia's perspective. Falling. In love with a successful, charming professional, building a life together, completely unaware that her partner had another family and identity. Should we tell her? I asked, not entirely sure why I cared about protecting a woman who was, however unwittingly, involved with my husband. Eventually, Vivian said cautiously, but remember, she could potentially tip him off, even unintentionally. For now, let's keep her in the dark. The final folder contained what Vivian called her conspiracy web, a diagram linking Michael Richard to various accomplices and facilitators. Thomas Mercer is our strongest connection, she explained, pointing to the insurance investigator's name. His sudden prosperity after closing your husband's case is highly suspicious. I'm still working on identifying who helped with the medical side, the dental records and DNA verification. What about the fire investigation? I asked. If it was arson, wouldn't the local authorities have detected that? Not necessarily, Vivian said. Small-town fire departments often lack the resources for sophisticated arson investigations, especially when there's an obvious potential cause like the space heater. Plus, there was no reason to suspect foul play. By all appearances, it was a tragic accident. She leaned back, studying me thoughtfully. There's something I've been wondering about. In the months before the fire, did you notice any changes in your husband's behavior, besides the financial maneuvers? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to revisit memories I'd colored with grief for the past 18 months. Now I needed to re-examine them for signs I might have missed. He became more attentive in some ways, I said slowly, more present with the kids, suggesting family activities, reminiscing about old times. I thought he was just, I don't know, going through a phase of appreciation. I paused, a particular memory surfacing. 3 weeks before the fire, he updated his will and insisted I do the same. Said it was responsible parenting. Classic pre-disappearance behavior. Vivian nodded, creating positive final memories while putting practical matters in order. He also started talking about his legacy, I continued, the pieces falling into place. What he wanted the kids to remember about him, lessons he hoped they'd carry forward. God, it's so obvious now. He was saying goodbye. The realization hit me with physical force. While I'd been interpreting his behavior through the lens of a committed husband and father, he'd been methodically preparing us for his permanent absence. Were there any unusual visitors or phone calls? Vivian asked. Anyone who might have been helping him prepare? I thought about it, then remembered something odd. About a month before the fire, a man came to the house when I was out with the kids. Michael said he was a colleague consulting on a project, but he seemed uncomfortable when I asked questions about it. The man had an accent, Eastern European. Maybe, Vivian made a note, could be relevant. Forged documents often come through international connections. She closed the folders and fixed me with a steady gaze. Now, for the immediate plan. I've confirmed that Michael, or Richard, will be attending a cybersecurity conference dinner tomorrow night at the Marriott. It's a perfect opportunity for documentation. He'll be in a public place with multiple witnesses. I want to be there, I said immediately. Vivian frowned. Eleanor, we discussed this. Confronting him prematurely could jeopardize the case. I'm not suggesting a confrontation, I clarified, but I need to see him, observe him in his new life. I'll stay out of sight, I promise. She considered this, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but with conditions. You'll wear a communication device so I can monitor the situation. You'll maintain distance and under no circumstances approach him. This is observation only. Understood? Understood, I agreed, though a part of me remained uncertain whether I could keep that promise if face-to-face with the man who had caused my children so much pain. What about the dental records and DNA? I asked, returning to the practical aspects of the fraud. How could those have been falsified? I have a theory, Vivian said, pulling out a separate file. The report indicates the remains were severely burned, with only bone fragments and teeth for identification. In such cases, visual identification is impossible, so they rely entirely on laboratory testing. She showed me a document with sections highlighted. The dental records matched because someone, likely with inside access, substituted records in the database. As for the DNA, they would have needed a sample that matched Michael's genetic profile. But how would they get that? That's where it gets complicated, Vivian explained. They would need biological material with your husband's DNA. But they would also need remains to be found at the scene, remains that would match that DNA profile. A disturbing thought occurred to me. Are you suggesting they used someone else's body? That someone actually died in that fire? Not necessarily, Vivian said carefully. The report mentions only biological remains and bone fragments, not an intact body. It's possible they used animal remains combined with planted human material containing your husband's DNA. Perhaps hair from a hairbrush, blood samples he could have stored, enough to create a positive identification without an actual human victim. The methodical calculation required for such deception was chilling. This wasn't just a man running from his responsibilities. This was a carefully orchestrated fraud involving multiple participants and utterly devoid of moral consideration. "I need to call my children," I said abruptly, the weight of their continued suffering pressing down on me. "Of course," Vivian replied gently. "We'll continue tomorrow. The dinner begins at 7 p.m. I'll pick you up at your hotel at 6:30. As I left Trinity Investigations, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Boston streets. Tomorrow would bring me face to face with Michael again, not as a shocked widow encountering a ghost, but as a woman armed with knowledge and a growing determination to expose the truth. But first, I needed to speak to my children, to reassure them that I would be home soon, without revealing the earthquake that would eventually reshape their understanding of the father they had mourned. How could I ever explain to them that their grief had been unnecessary, that the parent they had cried for night after night had willingly abandoned them? That was a conversation I couldn't yet imagine having. That evening, I paced my hotel room, trying to reconcile the life I'd been living with the reality now unfolding before me. Before yesterday, I had been Eleanor Bennett, widowed mother of 2, child psychologist specializing in grief counseling. I had built a life around helping others process their losses while managing my own, or what I had believed was my own, when I called the twins that evening, the weight of my secret pressed against my chest like a physical burden. "Mom, when are you coming home?" Sophie asked, her voice carrying the forced maturity she'd adopted since her father's death. "Tomorrow evening, sweetheart. I promise." I hesitated, then asked, "How's Liam doing after the incident at school?" "He's locked himself in his room," she sighed. "Aunt Janet tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't open the door." "Put me on speaker, and let's try together," I suggested. Sophie knocked on Liam's door. "Liam, Mom's on the phone. She wants to talk to you." "I don't want to talk," came his muffled reply. "Liam," I called, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not going to lecture you. I just want to check in. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." After a long pause, we heard the lock click. Sophie pushed, the door open, and I could picture my son, tall for 15, with Michael's hazel eyes and my stubborn chin, sitting on his bed, shoulders hunched defensively. "That kid had no right to say what he did," Liam stated immediately, his voice thick, with emotion. "No, he didn't," I agreed. And it wasn't true. The irony of my statement wasn't lost on me. In a twisted way, the cruel comment had been precisely accurate. Michael hadn't died. He had chosen to leave us. But my children didn't know that yet, and until I had concrete evidence, they couldn't know. "Dad wouldn't do that," Liam continued, sounding younger than his 15 years. "He wouldn't just leave us on purpose." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "Your father loved you both very much," I said carefully, choosing words that felt true regardless of Michael's deception. Whatever his feelings about our marriage, I had to believe he had loved his children. Then why did he have to go fishing? "Alone that weekend?" Liam demanded, the question clearly one he'd wrestled with repeatedly. Why couldn't I go with him like I usually did? I had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. "I don't know, sweetie. Sometimes accidents just happen, and we never get the answers we want." More lies. I was becoming what I despised. "Listen," I continued, changing the subject. "When I get home tomorrow, we'll talk about what happened at school. Not to punish you, but to figure out better ways to handle situations like that. Okay?" "Whatever," Liam mumbled, but the hostility had diminished. "I love you both so much," I said, wishing I could reach through the phone and hold them. "More than anything in the world." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, looking through old family photos on my phone. Our last Christmas together, the twins' 14th birthday, a spontaneous weekend trip to the beach. In every image, Michael smiled at the camera. The perfect husband and father. Had it all been a performance? Or had there been genuine moments of happiness amid his planning? The need to understand drove me to pull up our old text exchanges. In the weeks before his disappearance, his messages had been unusually affectionate. Thinking about you today. So grateful for our life together. Miss you and the kids. Can't wait to be home. We should plan that big family vacation we've talked about. Life's too short. I'd treasured these messages during my grief, reading them repeatedly as evidence of our love. Now they read like the calculated farewells of a man preparing to vanish. I scrolled further back, searching for clues I might have missed. 6 months before the fire, our exchanges had been dominated by discussions about finances. Had to move some money between accounts. Nothing to worry about. Investment opportunity came up. Had to act quickly. We'll fill you in later. Might need to tighten our belts for a few months. Temporary situation. I had trusted him completely with our finances, focusing instead on raising our children and building my practice. That trust had made me vulnerable to his manipulation, a realization that filled me with both shame and anger. Unable to sleep, I turned to our wedding album, which I'd brought with me to the conference as a comfort item, a habit I'd developed during business trips after Michael's death. The leather-bound book contained professional photos from our ceremony 20 years earlier. We'd been so young. Michael, just 27, me 22, both glowing with optimism about our future together. I studied his face in our wedding photos, searching for any hint of the deception to come. There was none, of course. The man who had slipped a ring on my finger and promised to love me until death had appeared entirely sincere. Had he been genuinely in love then? Had something changed? Or had the capacity for such elaborate deception always been there, dormant beneath the surface? Our vows echoed in my memory. In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. Michael had found a perverse loophole, faking death to escape those promises while I remained faithful to them. Around 2 a.m., exhausted but still unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began a task I'd been avoiding, composing a list of questions for Michael, should I get the chance to confront him directly. Why did you leave us? Was any of it real, or was our entire marriage a lie? Did you ever consider what your death would do to the children? How could you let us grieve for you while you started a new life? Who helped you fake your death? The list grew until it spanned pages, ranging from practical questions about the mechanics of his fraud to deeply personal ones about our relationship. Some were accusatory, others almost pleading. Together, they formed a roadmap of my confusion and pain, questions that had haunted me throughout my grief, but now took on new dimensions. Dawn was breaking when I finally drifted into a restless sleep, wedding album still open beside me. I woke to a text from Vivian. New developments, meeting at 10 a.m. After a quick shower and coffee, I headed to Trinity Investigations, mentally preparing for whatever fresh revelations awaited. The city felt different today, less overwhelming, more like a backdrop to the intensely personal drama unfolding in my life. Vivian wasn't alone when I arrived. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a detective's observant gaze sat beside her desk. Eleanor, this is Jack Donovan, Vivian introduced us. Former FBI, now private investigator specializing in financial fraud. I've brought him into the case. Jack shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Bennett, sorry about your situation. Jack has connections that have accelerated our investigation, Vivian explained. He's found something significant. Jack opened his laptop, turning it toward me. I've been looking into Thomas Mercer, the insurance investigator who handled your husband's case. His finances show irregular deposits beginning 2 years before your husband's disappearance. 2 years? I repeated, processing the implications. That means this was planned well in advance, Jack confirmed. Mercer received payments totaling $200,000 over that period, all through offshore accounts designed to hide the source. But why would Michael begin paying him so early? I asked. Insurance fraud this sophisticated requires groundwork, Jack explained. Mercer wasn't just paid to rush the investigation after the fact. He was likely advising your husband on how to structure the deception to ensure the claim would be paid. Vivian added, We've also identified a second accomplice, Dr. Alan Shapiro, a pathologist who verified the DNA match from the fire scene. He received a $75,000 consulting fee from a shell company 1 week after signing off on the identification. My mind reeled with the expanding scope of the conspiracy. So, Michael built an entire network to facilitate his disappearance? It appears so, Jack said grimly. And he used this network not just to vanish, but to ensure financial security in his new life through the insurance payout. What about the remains found at the cabin? I asked, returning to the question that had disturbed me most. If they weren't Michael's, whose were they? Jack and Vivian exchanged a glance before she answered. Based on the limited information in the reports, we believe animal remains were used, likely larger bones that could pass as human in a severely damaged state. Combined with planted DNA samples from your husband, it would be enough to establish identification, especially with Mercer controlling the investigation and Shapiro verifying the lab results. The calculated nature of the deception was staggering, not just abandoning his family, but constructing an elaborate fraud involving multiple professionals willing to compromise their ethics for payment. Jack turned to another document on his laptop. We've also been looking into the woman, Olivia Hartley. Her background checks out, but there's something interesting in her timeline. She was hired by the Gardner Museum 20 months ago, just 1 month before your husband's disappearance. You think she was part of this? I asked, surprised. Her shock upon seeing me had seemed genuine. Not necessarily as a knowing participant, Vivian clarified, but the timing suggests your husband may have identified her as part of his new life plan before executing his disappearance. Perhaps he visited Boston, met her, and saw an opportunity for his fresh start. The thought that Michael might have been cultivating his relationship with Olivia while still married to me added another layer of betrayal. Had he been living a double life even before his supposed death? What's the next step? I asked, pushing aside the personal pain to focus on the practical aspects. Tonight's dinner at the Marriott, Vivian reminded me. We'll document his presence, gather additional evidence of his new identity, and continue building the case. Jack has a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who's expressed interest, but we need conclusive proof linking Michael Bennett to Richard Wells before they'll formally investigate. And after tonight? I pressed. How long before we can take this to authorities? If all goes well, we should have enough by tomorrow to present a preliminary case, Jack said. The insurance fraud alone will trigger an investigation, which will then uncover the rest. The falsified death certificate, the accomplices, all of it. As I left the meeting, I felt both strengthened by our progress and overwhelmed by the complexity of Michael's deception. The man I had married, the father of my children, had orchestrated a fraud that went beyond simple abandonment into the realm of criminal conspiracy. Back in my hotel room, I faced a practical decision: what to wear to tonight's surveillance operation. I wanted to be inconspicuous enough to observe without being noticed, yet able to blend into the upscale hotel environment where the dinner was taking place. I settled on a black cocktail dress and minimal jewelry, elegant enough for the venue but not memorable. As evening approached, I prepared myself mentally for seeing Michael again. This time not as a shocked widow, but as an investigator gathering evidence against the man who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The hurt remained, but it was now channeled into determination. Tonight, I would look into the eyes of the man who had shattered our lives and begin the process of holding him accountable. Not just for me, but for Sophie and Liam, who deserved to know the truth about their father, no matter how painful that truth might be. At precisely 6:30 p.m., Vivian picked me up from my hotel. She was dressed professionally in a charcoal pantsuit, projecting the air of someone who belonged in the high-end business settings we would be navigating. Jack waited in the car, equipment arranged neatly in the back seat, surveillance cameras, recording devices, and a laptop for immediate documentation. "Remember," Vivian cautioned as we drove toward the Marriott, "your only job tonight is to observe. No contact, no confrontation." "I understand," I assured her, though my racing heart suggested otherwise. The prospect of seeing Michael again, now armed with knowledge of his deception, filled me with a volatile mixture of anger and anticipation. Jack handed me a small flesh-colored earpiece. "This will allow us to communicate with you. I'll be stationed in the hotel bar with line of sight to the ballroom entrance. Vivian will monitor from the vehicle with our surveillance feed." I inserted the earpiece, adjusting it until it was barely visible. "What's my cover story if someone asks why I'm there?" "You're Eleanor Walsh, consulting psychologist attending a separate function at the hotel," Vivian replied. "If anyone from the cybersecurity event approaches you, say you're waiting for colleagues." We arrived at the Marriott, its grand lobby bustling with conference attendees. According to Jack's intelligence, the cybersecurity dinner was being held in the Commonwealth Ballroom on the second floor, with cocktails beginning at 7:00 p.m. in the adjacent reception area. "I'll do a preliminary sweep," Jack said, exiting the car. "Eleanor, wait 5 minutes, then follow. Head to the mezzanine level. There's a small lounge area with good visibility of the reception." As I waited, Vivian adjusted my hidden camera, a brooch designed to look like a vintage cameo. "This will capture high-resolution images whenever you press the back clasp. Audio recording is continuous through your earpiece." "What if he sees me?" I asked, voicing the question that had been circling my mind. "If he notices you, don't panic," Vivian instructed. "Simply leave the area calmly. We already have enough to establish his identity. Tonight is about gathering supplementary evidence and details about his associates." 5 minutes later, I entered the hotel, my pulse pounding in my ears. The lobby was elegant and busy, a perfect environment for remaining inconspicuous. I took the escalator to the mezzanine level, locating the lounge Jack had mentioned. It offered a perfect vantage point overlooking the reception area where guests were beginning to gather for the cybersecurity dinner. "I'm in position," I murmured, taking a seat near the railing. "Copy that." Jack's voice came through my earpiece. "I'm at the bar to your right. Our target hasn't arrived yet, but his name is on the guest list, and his place card is on table 3. I ordered a sparkling water from a passing server, establishing my presence as a regular guest while scanning the growing crowd below. The anticipation was almost unbearable, knowing that at any moment, Michael would walk through those doors, completely unaware that his carefully constructed new life was about to unravel. "Vehicle arriving," Vivian's voice reported through my earpiece. "Black Audi, matching the car registered to Richard Wells. Target is exiting with female companion, Olivia Hartley confirmed." My hands tightened around my glass. Michael was moments away. "They're entering the hotel now," Jack narrated. "He's wearing a dark blue suit. She's in a burgundy dress. Approaching the main entrance. Now in the lobby, heading toward the escalators." I shifted position slightly, angling myself to see the escalators while remaining partially concealed by a large potted plant. And then, there he was. Michael, or Richard, as he now called himself, ascended the escalator with Olivia on his arm. He looked polished and confident, his beard neatly trimmed, his suit perfectly tailored. Beside him, Olivia was elegant and animated, laughing at something he said. They looked like they belonged together, a power couple gliding effortlessly through their privileged life. I pressed the clasp on my brooch, capturing images as they reached the mezzanine level. They turned toward the reception area, passing within 30 feet of where I sat. I held my breath, shrinking back slightly, but Michael's attention was fully on Olivia and the colleagues he was now greeting with handshakes and smiles. "Good images. Coming through," Vivian confirmed in my ear. "Facial recognition software confirms 98% match to Michael Bennett." I watched as Michael worked the room, moving from group to group with practiced ease. His persona as Richard Wells seemed completely natural. There was no hint of the man I had known for 20 years, no trace of the father who had taught our children to ride bikes and helped with science projects. "He's speaking with the CEO of SecureTech now," Jack noted. "Stephen Blackwell, the tall man with gray hair. This is significant. Blackwell has government connections." I observed their interaction, noting the deference in Michael's body language. This was his boss, clearly, and someone he aimed to impress. The conversation appeared intense, with frequent glances around as if ensuring privacy. "Can you move closer?" Jack asked. "We'd like to capture their conversation if possible." I stood, casually, moving to a small bar-height table with a better vantage point. As I settled there, I could catch fragments of Michael and Blackwell's conversation. "Final approval for the Pentagon contract," Blackwell was saying. "Encryption protocols are ready," Michael replied. "Just need to run the last security." "Tests. Demonstration for the committee on Tuesday," Blackwell continued. "This is it, Richard. Everything we've worked for." They clinked glasses, a toast to what seemed like a significant professional achievement. I captured more images, focusing on their interaction. "This is valuable," Vivian commented through my earpiece. "Suggests he's involved in government contracting, possibly classified work. That would explain the need for his background to withstand scrutiny." As I continued observing, something began to nag at me, a realization forming at the edge of my consciousness. Michael had always been ambitious, but his work in Philadelphia had been with private sector clients, nothing related to government contracts or classified information. This position at SecureTech represented a significant career advancement. Had that been part of his motivation? Not just escaping our marriage or family responsibilities, but pursuing professional opportunities that might have been unavailable to him with his real identity and background? A server approached my table, breaking my concentration. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" "No, thank you," I replied, smiling politely. When I looked back toward the reception, Michael was moving toward the ballroom doors, which were now opening for dinner. "They're heading in for the seated portion," I reported quietly. "Should I follow?" "Negative," Jack responded. "Too risky without a proper invitation. We've got good documentation of his presence and some valuable intelligence about his work. Let's not push our luck." I felt both relieved and disappointed. Part of me had been dreading a closer encounter, while another part craved the confrontation, the chance to look Michael in the eye and demand answers. "Stay for another 15 minutes, Vivian instructed. "Capture images of any latecomers. Then exit casually. We'll regroup at the vehicle." As the reception area emptied, I sat back, processing what I'd witnessed. Michael, Richard, was thriving in his new life, advancing professionally, building a relationship with Olivia. Meanwhile, back in Philadelphia, our children continued to struggle with grief for a father who wasn't actually dead. The unfairness of it all hit me anew, bringing with it a wave of memories, warning signs I had missed or dismissed in the months before Michael's disappearance. There had been the night, about 5 months before the fire, when I'd come downstairs at 2 a.m. to find Michael hastily closing his laptop in the kitchen. When I asked what he was working on, he'd claimed it was a surprise anniversary gift. I'd believed him, touched by his thoughtfulness. Had he actually been planning his escape, researching how to disappear? Then there was the strange phone call. I'd overheard Michael speaking tensely to someone about contingency plans and clean documentation. When questioned, he'd explained it away as a cybersecurity project for a particularly paranoid client. Another lie, presumably. Most telling had been his gradual emotional withdrawal, masked by occasional bursts of intense family focus, suggesting we take more photos together, insisting on recording videos of family events, creating what I now recognized as a curated final collection of memories. I'd attributed his behavior to a midlife reassessment, perhaps even a desire to strengthen our marriage after some rocky periods. Instead, he had been systematically preparing for his exit, creating closure for himself while leaving us with shattered lives. "Eleanor," Jack's voice interrupted my reflections. "Time to head out. Mission accomplished for tonight." I stood, taking one last look toward the ballroom where Michael sat, living his second life, then made my way toward the escalators. Outside, I slid into the back seat of Vivian's car, a curious numbness replacing the earlier tension. "You did great," Vivian said, turning to face me. "We've got clear documentation of his current identity, employment, associates, and even hints about his work projects. Plus this," Jack added, handing me his tablet. On the screen was an enlarged photograph of Michael's left hand as he raised his glass in the toast with Blackwell. "Notice anything?" I studied the image, then saw it. A small, distinctive scar on his middle finger, the result of an accident, with a kitchen knife on our 5th anniversary. "That scar is unmistakably Michael's," I confirmed. "He needed 7 stitches. It's documented in his medical records." "Excellent," Jack nodded. "Physical identifiers like that are gold for establishing identity. Combined with the facial recognition match and your personal identification, we've got solid proof that Richard Wells is indeed Michael Bennett." "What about the conversation regarding the Pentagon contract?" I asked. "Is that relevant to our case?" "Potentially," Vivian replied. "If he's involved in classified government work under a false identity, that adds another dimension to the fraud, possibly even implications for national security, depending on the nature of his access. Which could elevate this from insurance fraud to a matter of federal interest," Jack added. "My contact at the FBI will definitely want to know about this angle." As we drove back toward my hotel, I found myself wondering about Olivia again. She really doesn't know, does she? The woman he's with now. She has no idea who he really is. Based on her behavior and our background check, no, Vivian confirmed. She appears to genuinely believe he is Richard Wells, British tech expert. She's as much a victim of his deception as you are, just in a different way. The thought was strangely comforting. I wasn't the only one Michael had deceived, though I had certainly paid the higher price. I thought of the twins again, of Liam's anger and Sophie's forced stoicism, and felt a renewed determination to expose Michael's fraud, not just for justice or financial restitution, but for their emotional healing. "So what happens tomorrow?" I asked as we approached my hotel. "Jack will meet with his FBI contact in the morning to present our preliminary findings," Vivian explained. "Once they express formal interest, things will move quickly. They'll likely start with the insurance, fraud angle, which will then open the door to investigating the falsified death certificate and identification. And Michael? Will they arrest him immediately?" "That depends on several factors," Jack said, "including whether they see him as a flight risk and how they assess any national security implications of his work. At minimum, they'll want to interview him and likely seize his records and devices. What about me and my children? Will we be involved in the investigation?" "You'll need to provide statements," Vivian acknowledged, "but as victims rather than suspects. Your children's involvement can be minimized given their age and the fact that they had no knowledge of the fraud." As the car stopped outside my hotel, Jack handed me a USB drive. "This contains copies of all the evidence we've gathered so far. Keep it secure. If anything happens, if he somehow becomes aware of the investigation and approaches you, call us immediately." I nodded, slipping the drive into my purse. "I fly back to Philadelphia tomorrow afternoon. Will that interfere with the process?" Not at all, Vivian assured me. Once the federal investigation begins, they can coordinate with you regardless of location. And it might be better for you to be with your children when this breaks publicly. The thought of explaining to Sophie and Liam that their father was alive but had intentionally abandoned them weighed heavily on me. How could I possibly frame this in a way that wouldn't deepen their trauma? One day at a time, Vivian said gently, seeming to read my thoughts. First, we establish the legal case, then we deal with the personal fallout. I thanked them both and headed into my hotel, emotionally drained, yet strangely energized. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of official action against Michael, the first step toward justice for the pain he had caused us. In my room, I packed my suitcase for tomorrow's return flight, then sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the photos of Michael Richard captured by my brooch camera. In every image, he looked completely at ease in his fabricated identity, no hint of guilt or regret about the family he had left behind. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Will you be home for dinner tomorrow? Made. Your favorite lasagna." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, adding a heart emoji. "Love you both so much. Tomorrow I would return to Philadelphia, to my children and our life together. A life we had rebuilt from the ashes of Michael's deception. Soon, they would learn the truth about their father. A truth that would undoubtedly bring fresh pain, but might eventually lead to real healing. Not the false closure built on lies that we'd been living with for 18 months. Whatever happened with the investigation, whatever consequences Michael faced, my priority would remain the same: protecting Sophie and Liam while helping them navigate yet another seismic shift in their understanding of their father. I fell asleep clutching the USB drive. Physical proof that I hadn't imagined any of this. That Michael Bennett was alive and would soon face justice for his elaborate betrayal. Morning arrived with a certain clarity. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps because for the first time in 18 months, I was acting rather than simply surviving. The numbness that had characterized my grief was giving way to purpose, a determination to uncover the full truth of Michael's deception and hold him accountable. I dressed for my flight home while checking messages from Vivian and Jack. Things were moving quickly. Meeting with FBI contact at 9 a.m. Will update by noon. Jack additional background on Thomas. Mercer obtained. Definitive financial connections established. Evidence mounting. Vivian responded with a brief acknowledgement, then packed the last of my belongings. The conference's final session was scheduled for this morning, but I had already notified the organizers of a family emergency requiring my early departure. Not entirely a lie. At 8:45 a.m., as I was checking out of the hotel, my phone rang, an unknown Boston number. "Eleanor Bennett speaking," I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Detective Laura Suarez with the Boston Police Department. I understand you've been working with private investigators Vivian Reed and Jack Donovan regarding a potential fraud case." My pulse quickened. "Yes, that's correct." "I've been briefed on the situation," she continued, her tone professional but sympathetic. "Before this moves to federal jurisdiction, we'd like to take your formal statement. Would you be available to come to the station this morning?" I glanced at my watch, considering my 2 p.m. flight. "I can be there by 9:30, but I have a flight to Philadelphia at 2. That should give us enough time. I'll text you the address." As I rode in a taxi to the police station, I messaged Vivian about this development. "Expected," she replied immediately. Jack's FBI contact looped in BPD for initial statement since the most recent fraudulent activity occurred in their jurisdiction. "This is good. Means they're taking it seriously. We'll meet you there." The Boston Police Department's downtown headquarters was a modern building of glass and stone. Inside, Detective Suarez met me in the lobby, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mrs. Bennett," she greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming in. Ms. Reed and Mr. Donovan are already here." She led me to an interview room where Vivian and Jack waited with another man in a crisp suit who was introduced as Special Agent Marcus Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "Mrs. Bennett," Agent Chen nodded, "I understand you've had quite a shock discovering your supposedly deceased husband alive and living under a new identity." "That's putting it mildly," I replied, taking the offered seat. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence gathered by Ms. Reed and Mr. Donovan," he continued. "Quite frankly, it's one of the more sophisticated cases of pseudocide I've encountered. The level of planning and the number of accomplices involved is unusual." Detective Suarez set up a recording device. "We'd like to take your full statement now, starting from the beginning. The more details you can provide about your husband's behavior before his disappearance, the circumstances of his supposed death, and your recent encounter, the stronger our case will be." For the next 2 hours, I recounted everything, from the subtle changes in Michael's behavior in the year leading up to the fire, to the details of his death, through to my chance encounter in the hotel lobby and subsequent investigation with Vivian and Jack. They stopped me occasionally to clarify specific points or request additional details, particularly about the insurance payout and Michael's financial activities before his disappearance. "The insurance angle is our strongest initial approach," Agent Chen explained. "Insurance fraud across state lines falls clearly under federal jurisdiction and gives us grounds to investigate the falsified death certificate and identity theft aspects." "What about his accomplices?" I asked. "Thomas Mercer, Dr. Shapiro, the people who helped him fake his death." "They'll face charges as well," Detective Suarez assured me. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, at minimum. Possibly professional misconduct. Charges through their respective licensing boards." "And the national security implications?" Jack prompted. "Given his current employment with SecureTech and their government contracts?" Agent Chen's expression tightened slightly. "That adds complexity to the case. If he has access to classified information under a false identity, that triggers additional concerns. We'll be coordinating with other federal agencies on that aspect." "What happens next?" I asked, glancing at my watch. It was already 11:30 a.m. and I needed to be at the airport by 1 p.m. "We'll prepare warrants today," Agent Chen replied. "For Richard Wells's residence, financial records, and electronic devices. Given the national security angle, we'll likely move quickly, possibly as soon as tomorrow morning." "And Michael himself?" I pressed. "Will you arrest him?" "We'll bring him in for questioning," Detective Suarez said carefully. "How we proceed from there depends on his cooperation and the evidence gathered from the searches." "What about my children?" I asked, the practical concerns of a mother taking precedence over legal procedures. "How do I protect them when this becomes public? They believe their father is dead. Finding out he abandoned them deliberately will be devastating." A flicker of genuine sympathy crossed Agent Chen's face. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Bennett. We'll try to handle the public aspects of this case with discretion, but you should prepare your children for the possibility of media attention. Would you like us to arrange for a victim advocate to provide support resources?" I nodded gratefully. "That would be helpful, thank you." As the interview concluded, I signed my formal statement, and Agent Chen provided his direct contact information. "We'll keep you updated on significant developments. If you think of anything else relevant to the case, or if your husband attempts to contact you, call me immediately." "I still have trouble believing he orchestrated all this," I admitted as we prepared to leave. "The Michael I thought I knew would never have put his children through such trauma." "Identity is fluid for some people," Agent Chen observed. "The person you knew as Michael Bennett created an entirely new self as Richard Wells. That kind of compartmentalization allows people to distance themselves from the harm they cause." Vivian offered to drive me to the airport, while Jack remained behind to coordinate further with the authorities. In the car, she reviewed next steps from the private investigation perspective. "We'll continue supporting the official investigation," she explained, "particularly regarding the network of accomplices. Someone helped create the Richard Wells identity. That trail is still incomplete, What about Olivia? I asked, thinking again of the woman who had unknowingly built a relationship with a ghost. Will someone warn her before they question Michael? She deserves some preparation. That's up to the authorities now, Vivian replied. But they typically try to interview all parties separately to prevent coordination of stories. She'll likely be approached around the same time they move on Michael. I tried to imagine Olivia's shock upon learning that her partner of over a year was actually a man who had faked his own death and abandoned his family. Would she stand by him? Or would she, like me, feel betrayed by his fundamental dishonesty? You've handled this remarkably well, Vivian observed as we neared the airport. Many people in your situation would have immediately confronted their spouse or fallen apart. I don't have the luxury of falling apart, I replied simply. My children need me to be strong, especially now. She nodded in understanding. What? Will you tell them when you get home? Nothing yet, I decided. Not until the authorities have made their move and I have concrete information to share. They've been through enough without dealing with uncertainty. At the airport departure area, Vivian handed me her card with her personal cell number written on the back. Call anytime, day or night. And Eleanor, be prepared for this to become complicated. Cases like this rarely follow a straight line. I thanked her for everything and headed into the terminal, my mind already turning toward Philadelphia and my children. The weight of what awaited them, learning their father had chosen to abandon them rather than being taken by accident, pressed heavily on my heart. During the flight, I tried to focus on practical matters, how to tell Sophie and Liam what support they would need, how to shield them from media attention when the story broke. As a child psychologist, I understood the stages of grief and healing. But this situation defied standard approaches. They had already grieved their father's death. Now they would have to process a different kind of loss. The deliberate abandonment by a parent, who had prioritized his own desires over their emotional well-being. My phone buzzed with a text as we landed in Philadelphia. Warrants approved. Operation scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow. We'll call with updates. Agent Chen. So it would happen tomorrow, Michael's carefully constructed new life would collapse around him, just as ours had when he disappeared. There was justice in that symmetry, though it brought me no particular satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth and accountability. Janet was waiting for me at arrivals, her expression concerned. My sister had been my rock throughout, the past 18 months, stepping in to help with the twins whenever my grief became overwhelming. You look different, she commented as we walked to her car. Something's happened. I hesitated, then made a decision. Janet deserved to know. She had mourned Michael too, had helped shoulder the burden of supporting Sophie and Liam through their grief. I can't tell you here, I said quietly. But yes, something significant has happened. I'll explain once we're alone. She studied my face, then nodded. The kids are excited you're home. Sophie's been cooking since noon, and Liam actually cleaned his room without being asked 10 times. The normality of these details, my daughter cooking, my son reluctantly tidying, created a surreal contrast with the explosive truth I carried. How quickly their world would change again when they learned about their father. At home, I was greeted with fierce hugs from both twins. Sophie, tall and slender with my dark hair and Michael's expressive eyes, had prepared an elaborate welcome. Dinner. Liam, already surpassing me in height with the lanky frame of adolescence, tried to maintain his typical teenage indifference, but couldn't hide his relief at having me home. How was the conference, Mom? Sophie asked as we sat down to dinner. Did you give your presentation on grief processing techniques? It went well, I replied, the half-truth sticking in my throat. But I missed you both terribly. The principal wants to see you tomorrow about Liam's fight, Janet reminded me gently. Right, I nodded. We'll go together first thing. As the conversation continued around me, Sophie discussing a school project, Liam reluctantly admitting he'd joined the debate team, I found myself studying their faces, searching for traces of Michael. Both had his eyes, and Liam had inherited his quirky half-smile. Would they still value these connections once they knew the truth? Or would they come to resent the parts of themselves that resembled the father who had abandoned them? After dinner, when the twins had retreated to their rooms and Janet and I were alone in the kitchen, I told her everything. My encounter with Michael in Boston, the private investigation, today's meeting with authorities, and tomorrow's planned arrest. "My God, Eleanor," she whispered, her face pale with shock. "All this time he's been alive, building a new life while you and the kids suffered?" "It appears so," I confirmed, the reality still surreal even as I spoke it aloud. "That bastard," Janet hissed, anger replacing shock. "How could he do this to his own children? To you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still trying to understand it myself." "When will you tell Sophie and Liam?" she asked, glancing toward the stairs. "After tomorrow, once I have confirmation that he's been taken into custody. I want to have concrete answers when I talk to them, not just speculation." Janet reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'll be here. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." Later, lying in bed in the room I had once shared with Michael, I scrolled through the family photos on my phone one last time. Tomorrow, the official narrative of Michael Bennett's death would be overturned. Our private grief would become a public scandal. My children would learn that the father they had mourned was not only alive, but had willfully abandoned them. I set my phone aside and closed my eyes, mentally preparing for what promised to be one of the most challenging days of my life. Whatever happened tomorrow, one thing was certain: the carefully reconstructed life we had built in the aftermath of Michael's death was about to be transformed once again, this time by the harsh light of truth. I woke before dawn, my phone already blinking with a message from Agent Chen. "Operation underway. We'll update soon." While the twins prepared for school, I maintained a facade of normalcy, checking homework and packing lunches as if it were any ordinary morning. Inside, I was bracing for the storm I knew was coming. The call came at 9:17 a.m. "Mrs. Bennett, we have him in custody," Agent Chen reported. Richard Wells, confirmed to be Michael Bennett, was arrested without incident at Secure Tech offices. He's being processed now on charges of insurance fraud, identity theft, and falsifying federal documents. "Did he confess?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "No, but the evidence is overwhelming. We've seized computers, documents, and found a hidden safe containing both his identity's documentation." "And Olivia?" "Interviewed separately. She's devastated, had no knowledge of his true identity." I thanked him and sat in silence, contemplating my next steps. The truth could no longer be postponed. My children deserved to hear it from me before it became headline news. I called the school, arranging for Sophie and Liam to be released early. Then I contacted our family therapist, Dr. Winters, explaining the situation and requesting an emergency session. "Bring them directly to my office," she offered. "This kind of revelation requires immediate support." As I drove to collect my children, a strange calm settled over me. The deception was finished. Michael was facing consequences. Now my focus could be entirely on helping Sophie and Liam process this unimaginable revelation: that their father had chosen to leave them, that their grief had been unnecessary, that the parent they'd mourned had been living a separate life while they cried themselves to sleep. It wouldn't be easy, but at least now we could begin healing based on truth rather than lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,